הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish Insights. Rabba Yaffa Epstein is the senior scholar and educator in residence at the Jewish Education Project, where she helps Jewish educators bring deep, rich Jewish content to their students. She served before that as the director of the Wexner Heritage Program, and before that as the director of education for Pardes in North America. She has trained leaders, rabbis, and educators from across the spectrum of Jewish denominations. Try to name a Jewish nonprofit, and I assure you she has taught for them or taught to them through a variety of organizations, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to wish her a mazel tov in person for recently becoming a recipient of the prestigious Covenant Award, which recognizes exceptional Jewish educators. First of all, mazel tov, Yaffa.
Thank you.
It's amazing to have you here. Amazing to wish you mazel tov in person. It's a very special award and very well deserved. I think I was trying to think of a way to describe you in two words, and I think of you as like an educator's educator. Someone who is, I think, almost every age group and every denomination you've managed to be in front of and teach. And I could have listed all 20 organizations you've taught for, but I want to spare people's time. But you're someone that I was, as I was thinking about this year, and I was thinking about the new school year, across all the different educational lanes, what does education look like this year? And I figured I got to have Yaffa here to chat. But before we chat about that, I think this is your first time on JBS. Introduce yourself to our viewers. Tell us a little about yourself, Yaffa.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you for having me. So my story really starts with my parents, because my parents are both Jewish educators, and in fact, all of my siblings became educators as well.
Wow.
Yep, 5 out of 5 are educators in some way.
And I know of at least one brother-in-law, Michael Hatton, who's an amazing educator as well. So now it's a thing. It's a thing, apparently.
Some married educators, that's right.
Yeah.
So it's like the Epstein family business. But my parents worked in Jewish communities across North America, and then eventually South America. They moved to Chile. My dad opened a school there, and then in Hong Kong. And they really sort of traveled the Jewish world. And
your dad went to Chile to teach Judaism?
To open a Jewish day school.
Cool.
When they moved to Chile, my dad opened, he was the founding principal of a new Jewish day school.
Wow.
And in Hong Kong, he worked at Carmel, and my mom taught in the school. So my dad was the principal of the school, and my mom taught in the school.
And you guys were brought along for this, or this was before your time?
So thank God when they did the Chile and Hong Kong wing of things, I was already an adult. So, and we were out of the house. I'm the youngest, so we were already out of the house. But what they always taught us was the importance of Jewish education and Torah study, and really they taught us about how empowering Jewish education could be, and how it could be a common language for all Jews. So I grew up Orthodox, and often me and my siblings were the only Orthodox kid in our class, or we were in a small group of Orthodox kids in a larger community school. But that was really important to my parents, that we learned with all different kinds of Jews, that we went to school with all different kinds of Jews, and that we could learn from all different kinds of Jews. And that really impacted my life and my path as a Jewish educator. I have worked predominantly in institutions that are non-denominational or pluralistic or community organizations, because of that value that Torah belongs to all Jews, and that Torah is a language that empowers all Jews and can be a bridge builder between different kinds of Jews.
So funny. I also grew up attending an Orthodox synagogue, conservative day school, and a reform camp. And I don't think my parents were like, let's create this ecosystem where Justin's exposed to different ways. But I think you're right that somehow having a childhood where you're around different people, it's in my soul to be someone who thinks I can learn from every Jew, and that every denomination and political side has what to offer. So it really it shapes us. That's part of why I'm here at JBS, because we reflect that as well. Great. Okay, so you knew.
I knew, and Pardes, where we met, was a really important part of that journey. Like when I walked into the doors of Pardes, which is non-denominational Beit Midrash house of study for all Jews, I walked in, I was like, oh yeah, this is really home for me, because it really was about that empowering all Jews to grasp onto the Jewish tradition and Jewish learning. And so like that was really, really important for me, my own growth as a Jew and in my professional life.
Right. I remember this was, I want to say 2005, 2006, so we're a couple of years back, was when I was at Pardes. You had been there already, and I think, if I remember correctly, you were like transitioning from student to teacher. I remember there was like a lot of buzz around you, to be frank, that you were this very talented up and coming teacher. You taught I think an elective on the Siddur. Yeah, is that right? All right, there you go.
That's impressive.
I just remember being like, that's crazy, that's so cool. She was a student last year, now she's teaching a class. How does that happen?
Yeah.
What was that like? Was that, that was always your plan, or like they were like, you're doing great, let's tap you to teach a class? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, it really was. I really, really believe that it was like Yad Hashem. Like, there were a few moments in my life where God's finger like went like this.
Yeah.
And it was like I really feel like it was like a miraculous moment in my journey. Rabbi Aryeh Ben Zavid, who was teaching at Pardes at the time, was the director of the summer program. I was only had been at Pardes for a year. I was in the Kollel program, the advanced learning program. And he needed someone to teach a class. It happened to be because Michael Hatton, my brother-in-law, who was teaching at Pardes, and my sister Rivka were having a baby.
Okay.
And so he was like taking the summer off, so they needed someone to fill in. And I was like, how about you do that, Yaffa? But the truth is, he didn't even really ask me. It's actually a very funny story. I hope he gets joy from me telling it publicly. But he actually came over to me and he was like, I need someone who can teach a halacha class. Jewish law class on Shabbat, on the topic of the Sabbath, and who do you know in the area? And I jokingly said, I'll do it, which of course I was like, I'd only been there for a year, like of course it's not going to be me. And he was like, oh, that's so interesting. And I was like, Aryeh, like, what are you talking about? Like, what? No. And he said, okay, let me think about it for a little bit. And he gave me that opportunity. It was an amazing opportunity. And my brother-in-law, Michael, helped me. He sat with me and walked me through the material. And my dear teacher, Rabbi Dr. Avital Hochstein, sat with me and went over every single thing I was going to teach and helped me. And I had a lot of support, which was really amazing. And I taught, and I just fell in love with it. It was not my plan. I had gone to law school. I was going to go be a lawyer.
Okay. I
was just doing a year of study at Pardes. It was not my plan at all to be an educator. I was going to break out of the family business for once and be a lawyer. Yeah. And it was just a miraculous thing. I taught my first class and I just fell in love with it. And the students were amazing. And I have a lot of very famous people who happened to be in that. Like, they're big rabbis now who happened to be in that first session. And I just loved it. I loved helping people access Jewish text and Jewish learning, and I felt really, really blessed. And then I walked into Dean David Bernstein, Dr. David Bernstein, his office like a few months later, and I was like, okay, I want to teach in the year program, give me a slot. And he was like, okay, the slot that we have available is Siddur, is Jewish prayer. And I was like, oh gosh, I don't know anything about that. And it's actually like something I really struggle with, is my own prayer practice.
Yeah.
But you don't say no, when you get offered an opportunity like that, you don't say no. So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes. Yeah. And then I was like, oh my God, I gotta go figure out how to teach Jewish prayer. But I taught it at Pardes for 10 years.
Wow. And
it was really, really meaningful, and it changed my prayer completely.
Wow. Give me some high level gems from what you taught about prayer.
So for me, this was a piece of advice I got from one of my teachers at Pardes, from Rabbi Elisha Enchelevitz. He said to me, teach the Siddur, teach the Jewish prayer book as a text. Like, you know how to teach text. Like, teach it as a text rather than necessarily, something esoteric or something that's going to take you to high heights. Teach it, break it down, teach it like a text. And looking at Jewish prayer as a compilation of ancient texts was incredibly meaningful for me. And understanding that this is a cool thing about Jewish prayer, that our prayer books today contain prayers from throughout Jewish history. We have some from the Bible, and some from the rabbinic period, and some from the medieval period, and some very modern prayer. And that historical development for me was really meaningful to understand, this prayer makes sense in the context of the Bible. It makes sense in the context of, the rabbinic period where we're dealing with the loss of our temple. And understanding that these prayers were about people's real lived experience, and that we could connect to them in that way, and not just something I'm supposed to say and memorize and say rotely, but that this was written by someone who is trying to capture an emotional experience right now, was just so powerful and really, really beautiful and really transformative for me.
Wow. And what do we do with that today? I think sometimes, right, you have these things that made perfect sense then. I think a lot of people struggle with, first of all, the fact that it's in Hebrew and they can't access it, but certainly the challenge around, do I even agree with the things that I'm saying now anymore, that kind of stuff. I've certainly heard people share that sentiment. How do you help students navigate those challenges around the Siddur?
Yes, I think it's a beautiful question and so real. And I'm sort of a believer in less is more. Like, pick one sentence. I'm not saying you only should pray one sentence, right? But every prayer time, or every time you sit down to pray or stand up to pray, think about one sentence or even one word that you really do connect to, and just try to think about that, meditate on it, think about how it's affecting you today. So, like, for example, right, in the Amidah, in the silent meditation prayer, right, the Modim paragraph, right, the gratitude paragraph. Like, I think that's something we all can connect to, right? I might not connect to every word of that prayer, but I can connect to gratitude. So how do I allow the written prayer to access something that is authentic for me? And I just focus on that one word, Modim. Thank you. We thank you, God. You know, where can I access the authentic gratitude in myself?
Great. I'm going to take that question one step further, because we're in the high holiday season, as they say now, and one of the, I think, things people grapple with certainly during the high holiday season is that there's a lot of prayer, and we're spending hours in synagogue, I see people that bring books, that kind of thing, or people that jump in and jump out. But as you look towards the high holidays and you think about that, any guidance for people approaching the high holidays?
That is an awesome question. I think there are so many words. One of the things that's so powerful is the shofar, right? Is the ram's horn that we blow on Rosh Hashanah, marking the new year, and actually how it's not about words. How there's a part of our liturgy that's actually about wordless prayer. So let's say I really don't connect to any of those words, and I can't. Then there's actual spaces where it's like, nope, this is not about words right now. This is about a wordless cry that can actually get me further. So I'm not trying to cop out of your question, because I think it's a good question, but just in case we can't connect to any of those thousands of words we're saying, like think about, what do I want to think about during the shofar? What intention do I want to have? What are prayers that are uniquely mine that I want the shofar to sort of carry up? And also there's a way in which I think we think about prayer being external, about either with God or with our community or what I'm supposed to do or say or feel. And what if we could think about prayer, particularly this year, I think, as a way to give myself time and space in the synagogue or outside of the synagogue to myself. And, what does it mean to make time to check in with myself, to ask, like, how am I feeling this year? How am I feeling about starting a new year? How am I feeling about my relationship with my family, with my friends, with, my country? How do I, and really like using it as an opportunity to be present, I think would be a powerful opportunity as well.
Beautiful. I'll just note that it's interesting that you called the shofar the cries, like you use that language, because I think I've been thinking about it a lot, that it certainly feels like a time of crying for the Jewish people right now, on a bunch of levels, and certainly, we're it feels like there was a post-October 7th world, and now I feel like there's like a post, like Hirsch and the other 5 hostages who were killed world. It feels like that's a whole new world, and I keep thinking about like this year, what it's going to sound like, to have a silent synagogue and, those sounds blowing. And that, to me, it feels like, in other years, maybe it was a wake-up call. This year, I feel like it feels more like sitting with the crying, if that makes sense.
Oh my gosh, I just said that this morning, actually, that I don't know if we need a wake-up call right now, because who has slept well in the last 11 months?
Right.
No one I know has slept, right? So I think the image of awakening, or the sentiment of awakening with the shofar this year is very different. And really, I really do agree. I really relate to the idea of the shofar being about crying, and specifically wordless crying. We say all the time, there are no words, there are no words. And I think maybe this year it's like, yeah, that's right, there are no words, but there are tears, and there are the shofar blasts to allow us to connect. You know, one thing I'm thinking about this year in terms of that, the shofar's role, is that throughout rabbinic literature, there's an idea that when the Jewish people blow the shofar, we have the capacity to affect the divine. And this is, this is not everyone's cup of tea, the idea of God as sitting or having human attributes. But the rabbis are somewhat okay with it. And they talk about God sitting on the throne of judgment on Rosh Hashanah, and that through our shofar blasts, God moves from the throne of judgment to the throne of mercy. And that we have the capacity, through connecting to our own sadness and grief, to move God to mercy. I think it's such a beautiful, incredible idea that and powerful idea that the rabbis give us. And this year, to me, it feels like that's exactly what I will feel with the shofar. Like, I want to move you, God, to mercy, right? That's what we need now. We need so much mercy from you. And that I have a voice that I can use and call out to move God is very powerful.
Wow. Okay, I have a lot of things to say about what you just said, which is very moving. A few things. One is, you said like everyone's awake, which is so interesting to me, because I feel like, yes, I would say, I guess my caveat to that would be like, I think one of the challenges around this time is like where to put energies, right? So everyone's awake, but it could be that they're putting the magnifying glasses in the wrong places, let's say, and I'm not here to debate, which tactics or which behaviors, and I certainly am as clueless as the next person, but something about noticing there's a sense of urgency across the Jewish people, and I would say even beyond the Jewish people, certainly right now, and a sense of like people locking in. I think, how they're using their energies is interesting, and I think, if they did a Pew study on this, and they said, like, what are the top 10 tactics the Jewish people need to do right now to kind of restore order or make peace or bring us back to where we were, or whatever it is that we're bringing the hostages home, I don't know that appealing to God's mercy would make it into the top 10 for the average American Jew. So it's interesting, like that's what resonated for you, because I think I'm with you. And I'll add a layer to that also, which is, in terms of October 7th, I think, certainly one way of thinking about the high holiday season is that you have Elul, the month leading up to Rosh Hashanah, the last month of the year, which is a time of repentance and returning. Then you have, Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, then you have Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and then some hold that you have to the last day of right before what was October 7th, October 6th, was called Hoshana Rabbah, which is like this last moment where the gates close and God seals the fate of the Jewish people for the coming year. And here we had that moment last year where October 6th, the gates are closed, the fate is sealed, and then the next day, October 7th, we had this moment where, everyone could use their own theological language, but there was a breach of some kind. There was a breach of the protection, the relationship, the safety of the Jewish people, the Jewish journey, this like terrible, terrible moment. It feels like, it's so interesting the way you phrased it, that like we're coming now a whole year later and we're back to that moment, and we're saying maybe something went wrong. There was no mercy on October 7th, or maybe there were pockets of mercy because there were some positive, there were some heroic moments and people were saved. But it's praying for mercy. It's very powerful, and it's interesting. I didn't ask you a question there, but I guess just some reflections. If you have any reflections on what I said, let me know.
I know. I think a lot of people, something I've heard from a lot of people is like, how am I even praying? How can I even pray after October 7th? And, and where, we always ask the question when we see, horrific acts, like, where is God? And I think a lot of people are struggling with that right now. I don't have anything smarter than our tradition, and there's a lot in our tradition about that. But I think, for me, I'll just share. one of the things that is bringing me comfort in that question that you just asked, which I think what you asked, or what you're alluding to, is sort of where was God's mercy on that day, right?
Yeah.
Which is so real, so real. The rabbis have all of these texts where God expresses regret, and God is also crying for causing destruction to God's people. And for me, like, what I hope is that, doesn't excuse God, but I hope that God is crying with us. When we blow our shofar and we ask for God's mercy, I hope that God is crying. And the rabbis could imagine, because they had experienced such trauma, such pain, and they could imagine that God was with them in that devastation and crying as well. And they kept going, and they rebuilt, and they radically changed, right? If Temple Judaism was the main mechanism to reach the divine, once that gets destroyed, the rabbis don't give up. They say, okay, we're gonna have to rebuild, and it's gonna be something completely different. We're gonna rebuild, and we're gonna understand that God also regrets this horrible thing that we've lived through, and we're gonna continue being in relationship. I mean, it's intense strength that, I don't have the gall to say, like, that's how we should all be too, and let's just rebuild. I would never say such a thing, but I think that, like, that's giving me comfort that they could rebuild, that they could believe that God was crying with them. And that's what I'm hoping, I think, to tap into also on Rosh Hashanah, both to use my voice and use our collective shofar voice to move God, and also to meet God in the sorrow.
A reflection, and then a new question. One reflection is, it's interesting, you talked about how hard it has been to pray. I would say, we're both, I think, you're an educator's educator, but I consider myself an educator as well. And I think that, going back to my time at Pardes, like, Jewish text has been a central piece of my life. I actually, I also was on the lawyer path, and I pushed back a year of law school so that I could spend a year in Israel. So I was like, I love Judaism, but I don't know Torah. And to know Judaism, I need to know Torah. And I think that I've spent a lot of time trying to learn Jewish text, and you've, traveled the world teaching Jewish text. I would say a thing that's happened for me during this that I just wanted to reflect is that I used to learn Torah after I finished praying every morning, and now I pray for one of the hostages every morning after praying, which really, I feel like in some ways represented, and I know it's not about me, there's like other things out there, but I think it represented a shift for me where I kind of felt like, I don't know, I felt like a little bit, not a blockage, but a little bit of like, okay, like, yes, it's important to learn Torah, make time to learn Torah, but like, if I have those extra 5 minutes in the morning to do one thing, I didn't feel myself drawn towards, I need to pick up a text and keep my Seder going. I felt more like I need to focus my praying energies. I'm noticing as I say that, it's ironic that I finish morning prayers and then decide to pray, because that means something's not working for me in morning prayers, let's say, but I'm at least trying to devote a moment of my day to a particular hostage, and to say Tehillim, Psalms, and to focus on them. So I've had this kind of flip for me, I guess, let's say, where it feels like prayer is in some ways coming up and Torah is in some ways coming down. Just like I don't know, just sharing that as friends. Yeah, really interesting, right? Yeah, you can reflect on
and
it.
I love what you said about I finish praying and then I pray. And there's actually a piece of Talmud that says that. Like, okay, I prayed the set prayer,
right,
and then I add tachanunim. I add my own personal prayers.
Right.
So to me, it's very beautiful. It's so real.
Yeah.
It's like I want to. There's an element of prayer that's about set. It's about structure. It's about a daily practice, and it's communal. And then there's an element of prayer that's about something else. And
right.
That's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it's interesting. I think that there are people who, during this time, their prayer has gone up, and there are people who can't pray, and their Torah learning has gone up. And it's an interesting question about how we cope with grief.
Right. With grief. Right.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to follow up on something else you said, which was, you kind of alluded to the fact that similar to in the past, we are in uncharted territories and in a time of national tragedy and crisis. And I think, one of the themes that has came up the first week when this happened, right? Immediately it was like, what is happening at our universities? Because, how are we walking around in a world where people feel this way? Or what's happening in Gaza, that there's people that think that it makes sense to attack any human in this way, let alone a Jewish person. And then how have we failed our own students? What have we failed to teach them, or how have we failed to teach them in a way that I've heard the phrase like the "as a Jew" phrase. They're like "as a Jew," and then like you tell why there's Jewish. Have you heard this before? You're looking at okay.
No, I don't know this. I'm sorry.
In certain circles, the language "as a Jew," I can say this. Israel's committing genocide, God forbid, that kind of thing.
Sorry, yeah.
So people kind of say like, oh, that person has become an as a Jew person. They use the Jewish thing to go after the Jewish people, and they use the card of I'm as a Jew. All of which are examples where I feel like there's been a moment where across the board, from early childhood through adult education, there's been a sense of reckoning with education more broadly.
Yeah.
And I know that you're someone who really has taught people in seminary, lay leaders at Wexner, people that are post-college at Pardes. Now you're focusing on people who are, educating students in high school and elementary school levels, and those students as well. And I'm just kind of curious, before we even talk about the year in front of us, just talk me through like, how are you thinking about Jewish education, and like what has been shaken up for you around Jewish education, and what's coming up for you?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that we have learned is that educators need more training in how to talk about Israel, and that for many Jews, it's so uncomfortable, it's so complex, that I just stay away from it. And for educators as well, I stay away from it, or I just teach the sort of very bare minimum. Obviously there are different educational institutions. Some are only focused on Israel education, but I'm talking about sort of the vast majority of Hebrew school teachers, congregational schools, after school programs. Some day school educators would feel this way too, probably. It's so complex. I don't have enough training. And I myself am confused about it. How do I talk to kids about it?
Right.
So the most important thing we can do is teach the educators, train them, give them tools, give them very practical skills to have these conversations. But really important is not to make them simple, right? That we really need depth, we really need complexity. And I think the world that we're living in asks us to boil everything down into platitudes and a few sentences, and I have to pick a perspective, pick a team, and stick with them.
Right.
And it's part of the polarization problem as well. And we have to get educators past that to depth, to complexity, to their own deep understanding, and also to be able to say, I don't know the answer. Most of us don't know the answer, but I can, in that not knowing everything, and in that not knowing what the outcome should be or what we should do, here's how I can teach you to think about this issue. Here's how I can teach you how to hold this hardship that we're going through. That we have to give teachers the tools to do that.
Great. So I have a bunch of questions on that. Thank you. One is, let's start with the last thing that you said, which is it resonates so much, right? The idea of like nuance and conversation and entering the complexity. And like you said, it does not seem like we live in a world that is leaning into that right now. Right. And certainly, I'm not going to pretend to be any kind of I don't know if the word is historian here, but certainly the narrative that we often hear is that, like in schools in Gaza, for example, they're like being trained with certain narratives that really create like an eternal religious war, for lack of a better term, like that type of mindset. And so, you can imagine different ways to train and think about education for children, right? You can make you need to know the facts. I need to prepare you to be an advocate. I need to prepare you to have a relationship. I want to teach you to love Israel, that kind of thing. But is there a moment of reckoning among Jewish education that thinks that like, okay, this whole like, for a while we're like, oh, well, we didn't teach enough nuance, and now people are mad at Israel. And then there's a moment of like, wait, we didn't teach it. We taught too much nuance, and people are, So how do you raise a generation? Like, what are the educational tools to raise a generation to fight a war, for lack of a better term? We're literally in a war right now. It's not like, how do we do that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to disagree with you, my
Please disagree with me, please.
But I think thinking about this moment in North America as we're fighting a war, I don't think is good for us as a Jewish people.
Okay, great. I'm here to learn from you. Yeah.
I think in Israel they are fighting a war. Mm-hmm. They are fighting a war on multiple fronts, and that is very specific. Mm-hmm. I think here in North America we are asking deep questions about identity, and we are struggling deeply with how do we instill positive Jewish identity in our kids, and how do we instill a love of the Jewish people and a love of Israel. I think for me, I think that those two things, the Jewish people and Israel, have to go together. I think. I am not an expert in college campus. There are Jewish educators.
Full-time educator in your
there are Jewish educators who are really expert in what's happening in campus. I'm not at all. I don't want to pretend that I'm an expert in that.
But you're training the people who are training the next generation who are going to be on campuses.
So I think that what we need to do for kids and for their teachers is explain why Judaism is worth it. What is the value proposition? Why does it matter to identify as a Jew beyond just because it's my identity? What does that identity mean? Where is the depth of that identity? Where is the richness? Where is the practice? And I think for a long time we were scared of that because we didn't want to teach one kind of Judaism or say that one kind of Judaism is right. And I believe that. I don't think we should be saying there's one way to be a Jew. Of course there isn't. There never has been one way to be a Jew. Just because I don't want to say there is a particular way to be a Jew doesn't mean I can't teach the many ways of being a Jew and teach them with depth, complexity, and richness. What Judaism's unique value proposition is in the market is our depth and complexity. It is not Jewish culture, because then other cultures are wonderful too. That's not what we offer. It's the capacity to think deeply about ideas, to discuss vigorously ideas with people who disagree with us. That's what we offer the world. And that's what we have to teach our children. And that's what we have to teach our educators to be prepared for, is to offer that depth, offer that complexity, offer that real beauty and richness of Jewish tradition so that we opt into it and we choose it, and not say, well, you have to do these things because X, Y, Z. But it's so attractive and beautiful and rich that, of course, I want to be part of that, people. I really believe that we have the capacity to do that.
It's super interesting. So it's funny, one of the knocks people might say on Judaism, that like, the classic 2 Jews, 3 opinions, that we have trouble. There's always 1,000 opinions. I think that's one of the moments people are noticing now, is that there's not this like unified front of North American Jewry that's like clear what we want or what we're even asking. There's I think people are more sometimes focused on their political party than they are, the Jewish people for that matter, and across the board, all different areas. And I hear you saying that this is a feature and not a bug, that actually one of the things we are offering to the world is the ability to have complex conversation and to be in disagreement, which is a super interesting thing to say, that is what's so special about Judaism, particularly in this time, right? Because in this time, it feels like the world is so far from that. Like everyone's in their echo chambers, whether it's on social media or in their communities, and kind of hearing people who agree with them and staying away from people who disagree with them. And so I think, intra-Jewish, like within the Jewish people, there's not that conversation happening really. And, beyond the Jewish people, there's not that conversation happening. And I hear you saying this is the thing that's special and we need to get it out there. Okay, so how do we do that? How do you teach young kids to do that? Let's start with your area of focus, yeah.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
That we think about it. We think about machloket, we think about disagreement as something negative, and it's actually like the secret sauce of Judaism. Like for sure, I agree with that. But I think part of that is not just the disagreeing, but it's actually watching history. In other words, the disagreements that have happened in the Jewish community throughout history. I think we lack a stunning memory of like we should have a better memory of what has happened, throughout our history in terms of we've always been this way. It's not new. We are in a terrible, horrible moment for the Jewish people. Don't get me wrong, but we have had other horrible moments for the Jewish people, and what it would do is it would serve us well if we looked to how did we survive in the past. And community is a huge part of things. Learning is a huge part of things, and commitment to being with each other even through difference. How do you do it? I think one of the ways is being transparent with the kids. And well, first of all, again, like you have to have enough security in difference. I think what happens for a lot of people is I don't know enough, and so I pick something that I know, and then I just keep saying it many, many times. And
no one does that.
I just say it louder and with more people, then that's the truth, right? As opposed to saying, look, there is complexity here. Let me get a sense of all the different perspectives, or at least some of the different perspectives. We're never going to understand every perspective, but at least some. And even what you were saying about intra, like within the Jewish community, what are the perspectives, right? And then what always happens, of course, is that then we get into the question of like, oh, well, who's in the Jewish community? Right. And then we get stuck in that question. I think we often get stuck in that question. Who's inside? Who's outside? Where are the red lines? Where are the boundaries? Like, and what you were saying about magnifying glasses at the beginning, I think is exactly this. Like, we've spent a lot of time since October 7th, like examining who's with us, who's against us, who's with us, who's against us. And I understand the instinct because it's natural when you feel under threat to circle the wagons. But it's so unhelpful right now. Instead of asking, why should we be together? What unites us? Where can we work together? And there have been some really beautiful partnerships that have come out of the tragedy that we are experiencing, but there's also been so much redlining of each other. And, oh, you said that? Oh, you said that? Oh, that's it, you're out. And what we're teaching our kids is they have to be so careful, and they have to make sure they say it exactly right, and and it's not the right message. And I think a lot of parents I speak to are watching their kids say, I don't agree with everything you say, and therefore I can't be part of you. Right. Instead of saying, okay, don't agree with everything I say. Do you agree with 50% of what I say? Yeah. Can I learn from the 50% you don't agree with? Can I engage with you in that? And sort of letting go of the scarcity mentality, even though I know we're under threat and it's scary. But if we can overcome the scarcity and say, look at this richness we have, look at this beauty that we have to offer one another, our children, the world, and really double down on that, on the beauty of Judaism, on Jewish pride, on all of the positives. I think that will get us so much farther.
That's really, it's funny, you allude to, there's a lot of this like pointing fingers and canceling and running around and being like, we can't listen to that musician again, we can't support that athlete anymore, like that that politician, that political party, all those kinds of things, the gotcha moments, which is, and there has not been a lot of energy focused on, or I shouldn't say there is not, there's plenty of people doing this work, but perhaps we could use an increase in the focus on, the richness of Judaism and the beauty. So what is your charge to educators kind of going into this school year? Are you kind of like, what are you telling them? I think it's got to be a different year than the pre-October 7th year. And by the way, maybe it's even a different year post the 6 hostages who were murdered. I saw, I'm sure our mutual friend Alana Stein-Hain posted, she just moved to Israel for the year, and she mentioned how that dynamic of having the first day of school, you just moved to Israel, you're ready to start, and then that's the situation. And our kids, it was that terrible Labor Day weekend with that information, and everyone just like crying, like people just crying, like sitting home crying and being, glued to their phones, and just tragedy. And then you're trying to, have your children walk through the door of the first day of school, and you're trying to imagine as an educator, how do we show up for these kids right now? What's your advice to the educators you work with?
Well, first of all, I would say take care of yourselves. Mm-hmm. Educators have been giving so much this past year.
Yeah.
And to be honest, before that, with COVID, the Havdil, they're not the same.
Yeah.
But these educators have worked so hard. And the first thing I would say is, like, you need to figure out a way to take care of yourselves. Mm-hmm. How are you taking care of your emotional needs? We at the Jewish Education Project, it's very important for us to support educators, mm-hmm. their emotional needs and their professional needs. But I think it's really, really important. And I think to come back to the holiness of the work. Mm. Jewish education is a holy act. Mm-hmm. And we have an opportunity with newness to try to reconnect to that idea, that the work that we're doing is holy, it's precious. We have these sweet, beautiful children, and I think it can give us hope and it can give us strength that we have an opportunity to excite them about Judaism, excite them about Jewish community, excite them about their own growth. Mm-hmm. So to just, and I think that's true for parents also. I think giving your kids a Jewish education right now it's a brave act, it's an act of hope, and it's an act of holiness. Mm-hmm. And both parents and teachers, I think, to sort of grasp onto that, like, we are recommitting to hope, mm-hmm. and to holiness, whatever that looks like in mm-hmm. our various, institutions, but to sort of use the year as a way to reset, and also knowing that we're going to be carrying real sadness and real fear and real anxiety, and like making space for both of those things, which really is, we're really good at that in Jewish tradition. In our happiest moments, we are sad, and in our saddest moments, we have hope. And we know how to hold both those things. So, educators, take care of yourselves. Yeah. Parents, take care of yourselves, and then sort of recommit to this holy work. I think.
Beautiful. It reminds me of in the Jewish Way, Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg's book. He talks about Kaddish. The prayer that mourners say who have lost a loved one. It's basically a testament to belief in God. And so he says that in that moment where you're in your darkest moment, you stand up in front of a crowd and say Kaddish, and you say, I'm going to continue to serve. I'm still in. I'm moving forward with this. I'm not abandoning the ship. And I think what you just said, I think I a little bit took for granted. I live in Englewood, New Jersey, where no one's like, oh, maybe I should or shouldn't send my kid to school. But there's certainly pockets where people might feel fear around it, or feel like they need to leave another school and go there. And certainly with supplementary schools, which are, maybe a little bit more of a maybe I should or shouldn't situation, to kind of notice that parents stepping forward and saying, like, I am invested in the Jewish Education Project. I didn't mean it like that. But I am invested in the project of Jewish education. I am going to prioritize creating an opportunity for my child to learn about Judaism this coming year, and maybe perhaps it feels more urgent than ever, should not go unnoticed. And certainly also your point around the teachers and kind of what they've been through, the way you contextualize that. You alluded a little bit around the importance of sharing the beauty of Judaism with people, and we talked about it at the beginning of the year and how you think about the new world post everything terrible that's happened. I guess the theme certainly of this season is teachers are preparing their students for the high holidays. You mentioned the shofar before, but are there other gems that you could share with me and with our audience, for those of us raising children or thinking about the high holidays ourselves to help us navigate this time?
So one of my favorite pieces of Torah about the shofar is the idea that before every broken blast, before every shvarim or trua, the broken blast.
Oh, as opposed to the long blast,
as opposed
like the three or the, okay, got it.
Yeah, so right, there's a long blast, a broken blast, and a long blast for every single time we blow the shofar.
Okay.
And so before and after each broken, we have a long, unbroken blast. And the Sfat Emet, one of the leaders of the Ger rabbinic dynasty, of the Hasidic dynasty of Ger, teaches that it's to remind us that there's more wholeness than there is brokenness. This year that feels hard to say because there's been so much brokenness, but I want to try to reconnect to that teaching even this year, right? What is still whole? Where can we focus on the places that are whole, even as we, of course, hold the brokenness, and to remember that there's twice as much that is still whole, and it's easy for me to say, and hard to do, but I think it's really something I'm grasping onto this year, that there's still so much that is good and that is whole, and we can grab onto that.
Share some of the good with us.
I think Rachel Goldberg-Polin, who is my teacher and has taught all of us so much, at her son's funeral, managed to express gratitude. I mean, that is just so unbelievable that she was able to do that and teach us all that you could find gratitude after so much pain and grief and so much hard work and suffering. And she thanked God in front of the whole world. That's an important lesson for us to think about. Where can we look into our own lives and find the gratitude, find the goodness, find where we're not broken, where we have love in our lives, we have the capacity to grow, we have the capacity to work hard for the release of the hostages, we have the capacity to raise our voice, we have the capacity to blow the shofar and to move God. We just have so much capacity, and there is so much grief, and I don't want to minimize that, and we have to experience it, and we have to act as well, and build together, and build bridges across difference, and build complexity, and build communities where we are not monolithic, and be brave to expose ourselves to different ideas that are uncomfortable, whatever side. We have to, and we have the capacity to do that, and that is good. That is good.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'll ask you one more question. Mazal Tov on becoming a mother this year.
Thank you.
It's very special, and good for the world, good for you guys. I'm very excited.
Thank you.
I want to ask you to put on your parent. I think there's something unique about an educator becoming a parent. Let's say there's this moment, right? Because you spend all your time educating children, and then all of a sudden you have one. I won't say of your own, I don't like that language, but one that the Lord has put you responsible for, at least until they decide they don't care about you anymore, or something in between. What have been some learnings of that so far, right? Yakira middle name?
Yakira Ora Simcha.
Okay, Yakira Ora Simcha. My son is Hillel Moshe Mechuel. So we've done great by them. We've put them in a position to be successful in school.
Gonna hate us.
We're so cruel. So Yakira Ora Simcha. Tell me, as a human and as an educator, what have been some learnings of this new stage in your life for you?
Goodness, there is nothing more humbling. I mean, for me, there has been nothing more humbling than becoming a mother. And I really used to think that if you just put in all the right ingredients, into their lives, you give them lots of Jewish education, and you have some sort of power.
Yeah.
And I have a very dear friend who said, like, my job is just to get out of their way. And I was like, what? That's crazy. That's not parenting. And now I'm like, she's only 7.5 months. I'm like, yep, that's right. That's my job. I get it. There's this amazing, beautiful soul who definitely, she's our kid, but she definitely already has opinions. She definitely knows what she wants. She's very clear about them. Yeah. And she already has a personality. And my job is just to help her grow into herself, to nurture her voice, to empower her, to be herself and to be the best version of herself. And that is so humbling, especially as an educator. We're like, I have the answers and I know everything. And it's like, nope, I don't know anything. And that's the other thing I've learned about parenting is you get it down, I got 3 months, but but she's 4 months now, and all that learning was really useless. Now you have to learn everything again on the fly. And I'm told by parents who are wiser than me and have had kids for longer that doesn't end actually. So it's really you're always learning. You talk about we talk about growing lifelong educator. We talk about growing lifelong learners. Yeah. As a parent, you are a lifelong learner. Right. You are just learning, what does my kid need now? What does my kid need now?
Right.
So really humbling and a lot of learning.
That's really interesting. It's like almost being an educator that moves from 3rd grade to 4th grade to 5th grade to 6th grade. Each year you're moving up a grade and to learn the whole curriculum all over again.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. Well, now I want to reflect what you said back on what we've been talking about, right? So is it different as a parent than in the classroom? Is it, with a child, the self-driven child, let's call it, give them the space to grow and kind of maybe guide them when necessary. Whereas when we walk into a classroom, sometimes it feels like there's we need to teach the kids X, Y, Z to ensure our future. Is that a mistake, or is it different when you're in the classroom? There's a different responsibility. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think it's a real balance. You need to have coverage. You need to cover material, and it's very important to expose them to that learning and those ideas and the depth and richness, again, of that, Jewish tradition. But the way to do that is their own self-discovery. That really giving them the tools to be self-directed and self-motivated. So I think it's a question of methodology. We can accomplish coverage and specific content, and it's very important. But it's also about giving them the skills to learn that content so that they become empowered, self-driven learners. And I think the best Jewish education happens when we give the kids the tools to learn on their own and to be self-directed. So in that way, I do think it's very similar.
That's beautiful. That goes back to my maybe not perfect joke before about it, how it's not our child, but that God bestows us with the responsibility of raising them to a certain point, and that leans into the theme you're alluding to, which is foster some independence, be there to guide when necessary, but also create the space for them to become, let's call it, the best versions of themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Very beautiful.
Okay. What do you have to tell me though? Because you've been a parent for much longer than me. What can you tell me about?
I think what you're saying is exactly on point. I think that I'm trying to do a better job of choosing my no moments and also my step in moments, which I don't know is necessarily true. I think they might be modern nonsense. That there could be. I know that people that are very, very strict and pointed and have a plan for their kids and are pushing them, and that's how you get the Williams sisters in tennis, right? Which, for better or worse, right? But if you have a vision and you drive and you really push them, they can get somewhere. And I think sometimes giving them the space to go where they want is also powerful. So I think I'm trying to thoughtfully figure out when are the moments where, not as a reaction because something went wrong, but in a more thoughtful, responsive way, where can I direct them slightly, and a 1 degree to the left can shift the trajectory, but not constantly be educating them, if that makes sense. But I'm trying.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yaffa, what a amazing zchut to see you. Mazal tov again on your award. Well deserved. And I really, I'll join you in referencing prayer, and I say I'll pray for this year that certainly those on the front lines of Israel, the hostages and those in the army, should be returned home speedily and safely. And at the same time, we should usher in amazing Jewish education for our students who can really learn about the complexities and the beauty of Judaism that you're alluding to, and they can have access to that, and it can guide them through the next stage of their lives.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
my Torah.